Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. John has just told me that the sound is not only 100% but 125%. And I do believe that because at allpointstv.com we try to get it right the first time. And if we don't get it right, we have to have a session after the program is over. And then there's a lot of flag, we begin to bring the whips out and we beat people in line here because we have to have 100% of your time. And we expect you to be here every day at 2 o'clock, every Monday at 2 o'clock. And we have to be on point once we arrive, and we are asking for your attention. So we have to be on point here as well. We don't really whip anybody at the studio, in terms. What we do here is we just simply try to get it right the first time, and if we don't, we will come to you next time and get it right then. That's how that works. I do bring some things to you this week that are different from some of the others. I'm going to make a recommendation here that will be in keeping with what I understand is going on right now in South Carolina. I got some posts that were placed on my wall before I came to the studio, and what they were saying was that they are now meeting in, I guess, a special session in South Carolina, and I'll let you be the judge of what they're going to do down there in terms of their meeting on the Confederate flag. I don't think they'll be meeting in a session that is called specifically deal with this issue, where they're going to be calling the session and then they're going to say no to not taking the flag down. And I think that's a mistake. And I'm going to be writing on this when I get back to my office. I'm going to be writing about something that's very another way of looking at what ought to happen, but it won't happen because it will take courage in order to do that. But I'm going to make a suggestion here that could fix the problem and unify the nation at the same time. Because I can tell you right now, this is not going to unify the nation. This is going to further divide the nation, and that is probably the intent of those who are in back of this. Because I can tell you right now that in back of it, the ones that are driving are the progressives. This is part of a progressive agenda that was started under Theodore Roosevelt, and it's been going on underneath the surface, and they're now smelling blood in the water because they've sensed the American people's cowardice. And we can see that in terms of the capitulation we see going on right now. We saw it 2 weeks ago, I think it was, when they had the ruling by the Roberts court that is out of control. One of the verdicts was a 6-3 verdict. Thursday 2 weeks ago, they had a 6-3 verdict in terms of the endorsement of subsidies for Obamacare, without which it probably would have fallen on its own weight. It's going to fall on its own weight anyway, but it's going to carry the nation down with it before that happened, because we're on our way now to Greece. And then on the Friday, the Supreme Court came down with another ruling that was outside the orbit of its mandate under the Constitution. Article 3 certainly does not give them the power to rule upon marriage for the whole country. That is a state issue. And I didn't know that the federal government now is in the marital business, where they can order the states to act a certain way in how they would define marriage in the various states. I thought that was a state function, and I'm going to read something in this document right here. I brought the Constitution to the studio. And I want to go and read Article 1, Section 8, where you have the enumeration of powers, and we're going to see if there's anything in there that lends itself to that. And I know you're going to tell me that, well, they used the 14th Amendment, and they also talked about the equal protection of the law. Well, the 14th Amendment is what spread the equal protection to the states. And so if you had the same clause in the 14th Amendment is in the 5th Amendment in terms of due process, and that is what. So since it applied in the 5th Amendment to the federal government, then of course to make it applicable to the states, they then reiterated it in the 14th Amendment. I understand that provision very well, because it is the one that bestowed citizenship upon those who were formerly enslaved in the United States. And so I'm very upset about it being used for these kinds of deleterious purposes, and that's what the court was doing in terms of expanding this language into something that has nothing to do with marriage. And you cannot say that by defining marriage as between a man and a woman, that therefore discriminates against those who have chosen to be involved in relationships that have nothing to do with a heterosexual circumstance. You can have, I was arguing this morning, and I don't know why I go on these programs and talk to liberals. I really don't like to talk to liberals because I find that they are so misinformed on almost all issues. In other words, they're not wrong, just merely wrong on all issues, but there's, as Evan Sayat said, they're as wrong can be on every issue. And so I don't like to discuss anything with them in detail because it gets into an area of incoherency that I just cannot allow them to waste my time. And I have no interest in trying to convince them of anything because I understand the psychological aspect of the problem on the left. And so I do not engage the left. However, when they come on my posts on Facebook, I will in fact not only engage them, but take the gloves off. I have no patience for them. And I do not want to sit with them on any discussion. But I go on these radio programs. I sometimes am asked to come on these programs, and when I do, I have different people's opinions. There's a liberal point. There's a conservative point. I bring the conservative point, and there's another point of view brought by another person that's kind of like in the middle of the two, and it never is a. I never feel. I don't know what the word is. I never feel comfortable, I guess you say, in that setting, because I just sit there and listen to meandering nonsense, and I object to it, and so it's hard for me to sit there for 2 hours and go through what I have to go through, and I got to be there again next week, so that's gonna be a lot of fun. That's gonna be a lot of fun. But we were talking about the flag, the Confederate flag, and of course my position was such that any liberal hearing me talk about it cannot understand the issues that are involved, and so all of a sudden here I am, a black person, a black American, and I'm advocating slavery. Does that make any sense to anybody that has a P for a brain, that I would be advocating enslavement in the country? Just because I don't drink the Kool-Aid that everybody else is drinking, and I don't drink any of the Kool-Aid that they're drinking in South Carolina, because I understand what's getting ready to happen down there. I don't think that they've taken a vote yet, but I can tell you right now what they're going to do. They're going to cave because they don't have the politicians that they had that were meeting in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence on July the 2nd, 1776, when they were in that room, and they were in there, every time somebody would say something, they were up there hitting themselves on the neck because there were a lot of mosquitoes in there. They didn't have the kind of buildings you have right now where you can have the nets up and all that. These persons were being bitten, and they still in there having to concentrate on what they were doing. And somebody make a comment, and they up there swatting the gnats, the mosquitoes out of the way and get them off the necks, and wearing stockings. That didn't help anything. They're down there biting them at the legs, but they stayed focused. And on July 2nd, they came up with this document, and it was ratified, not signed, but ratified 2 days later on July the 4th. You ought to read, and Rush Limbaugh has a wonderful, somebody put in my post, a wonderful, long drawn out statement that his father had written about these persons sitting in that room coming up with the Declaration of Independence and the suffering they went through in terms of being rooted out, being hunted down by the British. They had an idea who were the ones that was going to support the separation from the British, and they were looking for these persons. And then when you read that, it's a tremendous treatise that his father wrote, and I think it may be in the book that Rush Limbaugh published. I know he's doing a series of books trying to put something out here for the children to read, where they can have a balanced understanding of the history of this country, because they're not going to get it in school. The progressives have taken over that network, and the way they are controlling that particular genre and bringing this generation up as a closing act of what they've been doing for the last so many years, more than 100 years now, going back to Theodore Roosevelt's administration that began in 1901 after the assassination of William McKinley. You'll see here where the progressives began to make their move against business and so on, and antitrust suits, just holding things down so that the progressives could be in charge, because the real ones that should be running society would be the ones who are the producers. And that argument going back and forth began to be highlighted at that time, has been picked up and run down through the history books to the time that we're living in right now. And we are at this point, and they're smelling blood in the water, because they have sensed that we can push anything now, and the people are placid, they're complacent, and they will not object. And they pushed this noise 2 weeks ago, and people did not say anything about it. The framers would never have accepted what is happening right now in this country. You would have an uprising in this country, but not now. So down in South Carolina, they're meeting, and they're going to do what I know they're going to do, because these persons are cowards. And we don't have those persons that was in that room knowing exactly what Benjamin Franklin was saying, when Benjamin Franklin said that we must all hang together, because if we don't hang together, we're going to certainly hang separately. They knew they were in that room. They were in that room. And they knew that if they had not won on that battlefield, every one of those persons in that room was going to be hung, because they were in that room, quote unquote, committing treason, and they knew that. And they pledged in that room their lives, their word, their lives, and their sacred word and their fortune behind what they were in fact doing. Those were the politicians we had then. These are the ones we have now. And there's no doubt that when they meet today, and by the time this program is probably over, they'll probably have the meeting over with. And I will tell you, when I get back to the office and begin to look at the news, the reports are that they're going to take all these monuments down. You cannot even begin to even get to the bottom of what they're talking about doing. And I brought a document here to the studio that I'm going to share with you about some of the things these people are talking about doing. And this is the kind of, they're putting some nails in the coffin here, because when you begin to change the history of the country, what are you planning on doing in its place? I mean, why are you changing the history of the country? You're planning on putting something else in its place, because before you can, what was that word they used? Fundamentally transform the nation. Before you can fundamentally transform anything, you have to, before you can construct, you have to deconstruct. And what you're seeing right now, you're seeing a deconstruction of America. But I'm going to give you, I'm going to give South Carolina another way that they could have handled this business, and the nation also, before we get off the air, because there's a way to fix this. But it will not, you will not fix it by taking down these statues and these monuments. And you're talking about a lot of things here. It is unbelievable. This is 2 pages long of things they're talking about doing, because it's not going to stop with the Confederate flag, because that's not the intent. The intent is going through that. The intent is much larger than this. And there are people that have not yet picked up what these progressives have in mind, but they're behind the scenes, and they are operating as they are in terms of constraining and controlling what people know. It's a very clever design that's going on right now, including in the schools. I have people right now in the classrooms all over the country. They're writing me, telling me what they must do in their classrooms. And I was writing on the Facebook wall, I was writing that one of the things that they're doing is that they are controlling the information by, first of all, controlling the tests. When you control the test, you control what's taught. And the ones that are controlling what's tested and therefore what's taught is the government, because those are the government tests. So they have to go in there. This is what teachers will tell you. They have to go in there and against their will, many of them, and they're in there teaching to the test, because the test is the way they evaluate whether or not the students are learning. Learning what, though? Learning what the government wants them to know. And they're not learning anything about what happened in that room in Philadelphia, because that's not taught. And this is not taught because it's not tested. It's very clever what is taking place. And so they come out and they say that the Confederate flag has something to do with slavery. And I raised the question in my post yesterday, because I wanted to wait until the day after the celebration of the birthday of the nation, 239 years in the making, starting with 1776, that we are now 239 years old if you dated back at that point. Of course, we're a little bit younger if you dated at the point of the Constitution being drafted in Philadelphia and then ratified the following year in 1788 when it was ratified. The following year we're a little bit younger, but if you go back to the time in which we declared the independence, then we are talking about 239 years. However, we have to understand that it wasn't agreed to by Britain. We had to make them aware that the document meant what it said. And they had to stand resolute. They could not be willow trees and bending in the wind, because that would have been the doom of all of them. And not one of those persons, 56 persons, signed the Declaration of Independence, and not one of those persons caved. You'd be surprised at what price they paid. And what is happening in South Carolina is really a travesty. And I don't even have the report out, but I can tell you what, I know these politicians. I know these politicians. They are not going to stand up. And I had Nikki Haley. Let me read this to you, just the headline. Haley says church shooting will forever change her outlook. So that would be the equivalent of going to church and being immersed in water and coming back up and being born again. She's been born again. Dylan Roof going to Emmanuel AME Church and shooting to death 9 people has convinced her the flag made him do it. And so the headline, which came out yesterday, Haley says church shooting will forever change her outlook. And it's changed the outlook of a whole lot of others too. It changed the outlook of Tim Scott, who I don't have any respect for anymore. I won't even listen to this man anymore. And this Lindsey Graham, his candidacy is DOA. We got to get that boat out of the water, and that's going to be dead on arrival. They were 3 weeks ago, they were saying that the heritage of the South must be maintained, and this is not about what they're saying is about. They were standing resolute together as the 2 senators from South Carolina. Guess what they're saying now? As Nikki Haley, baptized, because she went to church and saw what happened there, and so she's now born again. And Haley says church shooting will forever change her outlook, and her outlook has been changed. And guess what? She wants now to have the South repudiate its heritage. Now, this morning on the radio, they wanted to argue, trying to make my position seem like I was for the continuation of slavery. You know what? When I'm talking to liberals, I have to tell you something, that I don't play that. Your mentality is such, is that you hear what you want to hear. And you don't play that game when I'm in the environment, because I don't play that. No sane person could have heard what I said this morning and make that conclusion. But that's what liberals do, just like they did with Clarence Thomas.
The qualifier was sane. Remember, he said no sane person.
No sane person, and liberalism is is insane. I am very convinced that liberalism, as many persons are now coming to, and I've been saying it for a while, because I didn't understand it when I was analyzing what was going on in history, looking at it through a historical lens. I didn't understand why what was happening in history was happening in history. And I had a political science background, and I took 18 hours of psychology, but I didn't really apply my psychological training, my psychology training into my history field. I thought that these were separate. I should separate the two. But I began to realize that something is missing in terms of my political science application of history. Something is missing here. And it wasn't until I began to understand that the missing part of it was the psychological aspect, and I began to see something else into it at that point. And I do agree with those who have said, and many people are saying it, that liberalism is a mental disorder. And I see it operative numerous occasions. One of which is this guy that was he on the one on Star Trek, the one that was saying that Clarence Thomas was a clown for writing his dissenting opinion to the same-sex marriage case, and he said that that man was equating that with slavery. Did the man read the Clarence Thomas's objection? I read the objection. I'll tell you where that part of it is. The objection is in part 4, the last part of the opinion written by Clarence Thomas that agreed with 3 of the other judges on the court. Well, this was a 5-4 verdict, so Roberts was back over there with the conservatives this time. So it was Souter and Scalia, it was Roberts and Clarence Thomas. Although Roberts over there in the 6-3 vote, he can't make up his mind which side he's on. We can dismiss him as being serious. He can't. He's just like Kennedy on the court. He can't. He wants to be the swing vote, and it's now swing vote +1 because Roberts is all over the place. But he's back over with the conservatives in the same-sex marriage case after having gone over there with the Obamacare, and it was Souter, Scalia, Roberts, and Clarence Thomas, and they all descended from the majority view, but Thomas and Scalia, I read Scalia's report also, and I think he made some very good points, and Clarence Thomas made some very good points as well. But the liberals have, what's his name, George Takei, even the Japanese are coming in here calling Clarence Thomas and Uncle Tom, and you can do that because you won't get any blowback from these Negroes. That's Negroes. It's pluralized. A lot of them. Because you won't get any blowback as long as you're criticizing those on the right. You better not say that about any of the ones on the left, though, because that makes up 90% of the population. But I'm here to defend Thomas in this particular case because Clarence Thomas was absolutely right. Clarence Thomas was saying the same thing you saw down in Charleston, South Carolina. You see, Dallin Ruff went in that church and he shot 9 people to death. Those were people that had relatives in that church. Those persons had family members. And I want you to listen to them when they spoke about that travesty. Every last one of those persons maintained their dignity. And what Thomas was saying, relating it to the argument that if they do not in fact call same-sex marriage, that the people do not have dignity, what Thomas was saying is that if you could not take the dignity from the slave population, and they were enslaved, not everybody of course, but I'm saying slavery itself as an institution would have been, if you dated at 1619, it would have gone on for 246 years, from 1619 to 1865, then at what point did the slaves lose their dignity under that institution? And what he was arguing is that if it did not happen there, how can you argue that it happens in terms of a definition of a term? Well, they're arguing this morning. I don't argue with people. I tell them what my point of view is. There'll be no argument here. I don't respect your point of view enough to argue with you. The idea that you have to change the definition of marriage in order to give people their dignity. Why did they lose their dignity in the first place? You have the right to your relationships. You have the right to be in love with whom you choose to be in love with. No one, I don't think today, in 2015, They might have argued it back in the time period when you had Sodom and Gomorrah and they paid the price for that, but they're not arguing that today. You can be involved in any relationship you want to. The argument is whether or not you have to have marriage to dignify that relationship. Did black people in this country, by the way, have to change their color in order to maintain their dignity as a group? I just want to raise that question with you. Did they have to change since they were discriminated against, not by the whole country, by the way? This discrimination against blacks is localized, and I want to give you a page number here because I don't think that you want to read the whole book. But I'm going to think of the page number and give it to you because I want you to go to this page. If it's not on that page, come back and get, I'll pay you. You're not going to get paid, I'll tell you that right now. It's going to be on this page. But I want you to go read this book it's written by Perriman. And the name of the book is called Blacks, Whites, and Racist Democrats. And I want you to go read in that book. And I'm going to read it next week and show you the page number because I want to bring the page and let you see it's on that page, but it will be on that page. And on page 172 of that book, you're going to see where he talks in that book as he gets to the closing parts of the book and he's making his conclusion. His conclusion is, based upon what he wrote in the book, was that the racism we want to try to act like the whole country was guilty of, he says in his conclusion, starting in 1792 and coming to the present time, really comes up to 2010, and he says that from that point when he starts his study of the 2010, this racial baggage is that is owed to, is that which one group has burdened the country with, a single group, a single political party, and he names that party. It's not the Republican Party. So what party would that be? And those of you that's arguing that a flag does that, let me ask you this question here, which I asked in my post yesterday. The Confederacy was from 1861 to 1865. That is 4 years. How many of you out there believe that slavery started in 1861 in this country? Was there slavery before 1861? And if the answer is yes, what flag were they using then? Because the so-called Confederate flag wasn't even the flag that was there. The stars and the stars and bars, what they called that flag, I think it was called the stars and bars. It was the first flag. They had three different flags in the Confederacy. Neither one of them flew over the Confederacy, because every state had its own. You see, this was the Confederation. It was called the Confederation of States, the Confederate States. And Confederation is that they are declaring their independence again, which is the foundational parts of the country, when the 13 colonies, each one of them was a particular state, and they were a nation in a sense. And they all had their own flags. Didn't have a flag over the whole network, because each one of them was an independent state. And so you would see then that each state had its own flag. And this idea that you had a Confederate flag and it flew over the Confederacy and things like that, that's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And it's amazing to me that people want to talk this hot air when I studied the record, and I knew it better than most and would say it better than most, and would not leave any of it out like most, because I don't have any bones to pick. I'm not one of the persons who's a Lincoln cultist. And I'm going to read you Lincoln's words, because what the cultists do is they want to skirt around different things that Lincoln said and then pick and cherry pick. You know, all of us have wonderful things we've said in our lifetime. If you just cherry pick all the things we said that were wonderful, we're great. We're just like angels. But if you tell everything that we said and put everything in the context in terms of what was being stated, then that paints another narrative of who you are, doesn't it? And so I'm going to let Lincoln speak himself, and not have the person cherry picking his words by reading a single speech that he made. And this speech right here is Lincoln's first inaugural address given on March the 4th, 1861. You know, the president was inaugurated at that time in March 4th. It was changed in 1933. But at this time, the president is inaugurated on the 4th of March. It was changed during Roosevelt's term. But when he spoke in his first inauguration, and there are four of them it's two of them he's going to have, the first one will be the one at the beginning of this secession movement that they want to call a civil war. We have not fought a civil war in this country, but they want to call it a civil war. How is this a civil war? And a country is using the Declaration of Independence, and they are going back to the framers, and they're using the document the framers started out with. As they start out on their journey of secession, they're going back to the foundation documents where it says that whenever any government becomes injurious of the reason why it was set up, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish their government. And they're seceding from this union. They're not trying to compete for power within the boundaries of the union. They're creating another country. That's what they were doing. And they were doing it because of the points made in Charles Adams's book. Adams has a brilliant book out, several of them in fact, about taxes. Those dirty, rotten taxes. I said earlier that Rush Limbaugh published his father's writing on those people in that room, those 56 persons that would eventually sign their name to the Declaration of Independence. There's only one error that there's one thing I would point out in his analysis of that is wrong. It's a brilliant piece, by the way. It's an absolutely brilliant piece of writing, and it's just brilliantly written. But I will point out a point that is a major point that has tremendous significance. And that's where he drew the conclusion that most persons draw in terms of the objection of the colonists. He does say correctly, though, that this was a conservative movement that wanted to go back to the status quo. That distinguishes this revolution from the one that would mimic it in one sense, but did not understand what it was mimicking when it went on in France 13 years later. They were mimicking this revolution, had been inspired by it, but they did not understand the underpinnings of it. You see, the American Revolution was a conservative revolution. The one in France was a liberal revolution, and that's why everybody was losing their head. Even Robespierre. Do you know that in this revolution in America, that once this war was over, only 16% of the people in the colonies took part in this revolutionary struggle? And there were some that would still align themselves with the British. But after that war came to a close, there was not one incident of retribution against anyone that was here. And Benedict Arnold went to Britain because of the treason he was involved in, having been involved in the Revolutionary War at one point and went over to the other side. There was treason now that we have a country here, but there was no retribution. Not one person lost their life when this war was over. Compare that to the French Revolution. Compare that to what the liberals did. And you're telling me about liberals. I do not talk to them. They talk to the hand. And so I was making this argument that you had slavery before the Confederacy was set up in 1861, and that flag does not stand for slavery. That flag that everybody's talking about that has 13 stars in it. You know yourself that there were only 11 quote unquote Confederate states, 7 of them at the beginning. Nobody's ever explained why it was that they started out with 7, but why 4 joined them after Fort Sumter. Why did they join? See, nobody's ever answered that question about you started out in December the 20th. South Carolina announced its secession from the Union on the 20th of December, 1860. Why would that be the case? Because the election had taken place in November, in which not a single Southern vote went to Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln only got 40% of the vote, by the way, in that particular election. But they decided then, given Lincoln's record, not his record on slavery, his record on the tariff. And I'm going to read you Lincoln's word. If you think it was about slavery, I want to read Lincoln's words. You're not going to cherry pick with me. I'm going to read Lincoln from his inaugural address given at the beginning of his term. Some other things he said in his second inaugural address when the war was concluding. Wasn't quite over yet. It didn't end until April the 9th of 1865, and of course the inauguration would have been March 4th, but it was winding down, and the South, which had put up a valiant effort, had actually fielded the greatest army this country has ever produced in the history of the United States. You cannot underestimate the sacrifice these people were willing to pay for a principle they were standing on. These people lost everything. But because the principle was so profound with them, because they were rooted in what had happened with the founders, and they were holding on to that as to how government ought to behave. Now, here's what Limbo's father made his mistake in. He correctly saw that this was a conservative revolution, and it was that, without any question. And when you say that to people, they're so ignorant about the history of this country that they would challenge that notion. I've even had people tell me that Hitler was a conservative. And there you have, and you don't have to read Jonah Goldberg's book called Liberal Fascism. I don't think the book should have been called Liberal Fascism. I think it should have been called Liberalism is Fascism. And anybody that doubts that, and you can't doubt in the black community. I was in an argument last week, and a person was asking me, what percentage of black people feel this way? I said 100%, because you have to understand something here. They feel 100% about this way about that issue we were discussing, but it is determined by who's around them when they're talking. In other words, the fascism is such that you saw it in Ferguson. They saw what happened to Darren Wilson. And there were some people honest enough to say what they saw. But when did they say that they saw it? In a room, in the dark, in the booth, in the back of the room, in the dark. Because to have said it in public would have brought retribution. I mean, what's that slogan they have in the community? Snitches get stitches. And so when I said, he asked, well, what percentage you think would be the percentage? And I told him 100%. You know, of course they're gonna, and I said, minus some folks that are honest enough to say otherwise. But those are not the black folks, those are the Uncle Toms. You know, folks, I have to tell you something. There are a lot of people out here doing a lot of talking. And it's all noise. It's nothing but noise. And if you had a background in history away from the classroom, I was good in the classroom. I could retain information. And I had teachers stand over my desk because they could not believe that I was doing what I was doing on those tests that they passed. Stand over my desk because they were telling me that I had to be cheating. In fact, I walked out on one test in 15 minutes. He was up there talking about how hard the test was, and I was up there writing. I didn't care what he was up there talking about. I was writing the test out. He looked out, ladies and gentlemen, his name, he's deceased now, so I can mention his name. His name was Dr. Collins. And he wanted everybody to know he had a PhD. He was a Kappa. What's that thing they have? Kappa, whatever that thing is, a Kappa Alpha, some Kappa where the top of the line. He wanted everybody to know he was that person. And he had a PhD, and he wanted everybody to know he had graduated from all these schools and had these degrees. And he would make tests out, and he would actually ask questions that he would take from the footnote, because his thing was to fail everybody where they had to come begging him. He wanted to have this power. And I had read the footnotes. And if I read something the night before, I could put it down on paper. So Because my high school, we had to memorize everything. You know, had to memorize night before Christmas. You had to memorize your timetables, memorize the Gettysburg Address. I mean, memorize everything. Memorize poems. I memorize poems right now that I back in that time period. So I'm in this classroom, and he walk in there, and he's talking about, ladies and gentlemen, I can hear his voice right now. Ladies and gentlemen, you can't pass this test because I can't pass this test myself without my notes. I'm sitting there listening to this man up there talking that insanity. And while he's up there talking, I'm writing the test out. In about 15 minutes, it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes, I went up there and passed the test in. I should have said it. I will say this. I should have said it in my chair, because I realize now how that looked to him. He's bragging about how hard the test is. I'm walking out 20 minutes later. I'm showing this guy up, and I walk across the classroom. And he did not like that. And students came to me during lunch hour and said, George, he asked, who is that young man? Because they asked him to grade my paper. And I had made 95%. I didn't even know how I missed the ones I missed. But that guy wanted to know who I was and blah, 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 asking questions. So he did not like that. Well, what I was doing was going to the dorm to study for the next test, because I was ready for his test. I don't care what he asked in that test. But I had not done as much investment with the next test. But I had 3 hours. I was going back to my dorm to study for that one. But he didn't know that. And when he came, I went to class that Saturday. I never forget it. I had my umbrella. It was raining outside. I had my books. I put them under my desk, because I had 2 classes on Saturday. And he walked across the threshold. He didn't even get across the threshold. And he pointed at me at my desk. I was sitting there because I arrived early for class. I didn't want to give the teachers a chance to throw me out for that, coming in late. And he walked across the threshold. I don't even think he walked across the threshold. I think he got right to the door. And he pointed to me and said, "You can get out of here." And I got my coat, my hat, my umbrella, and I left. My books, I left. He told me to get out. I got out. I came back, but I got out. And that was really quite a remarkable time for me. But I did get out of that class. Now, the point I'm making is this. I was good in the classroom, but I didn't really know history until I got out of the classroom and got into books. Now, these books I got into were the books that they were not assigning. And I kept asking myself the question, when I got through these books, I kept asking, why did that happen? That didn't make any sense. And I was looking at it from the standpoint of only the historical record. Why do these things keep happening in history? When I read Count Vonnet's book called The Ruins of Empire, that pretty much did it for me. This book was written in the 1700s. And this French writer named Constantin Francis Vonnet, Volney. When I read this book called The Ruins of Empire, he had gone to these ruins, and he had his alter ego in the book. It was like him talking to himself. And he called his alter ego the genius. And he's saying, "Oh, genius, what explains these ruins? How could these great empires, the Persian Empire, the Assyrian Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Greek Empire, went to all these ruins. How could these empires have been so great? And look what they've been reduced down to now, to dust. These are the dustbins of history. These relics indicate the greatness of these civilizations." And in that book, he raised these questions that raised questions in my own mind. I wanted to know myself after I read that book. Why did these things occur? And then I began to look at an impulse in history, which is what I was missing. And the impulse of history is something else away from just the historical record. I mean, this happened in this date, and this happened at that time, and here's what they said. But in back of it is a psychological thing that you have to also consider in terms of the whys and the what and the wherefores in it. And those were the fundamental questions that was out of my study and out of my purview when I was in the classroom doing the testing. You see, the testing does this to you. It narrows you in and focuses you in on a certain set of information, which you have to, in fact, know. But unless you're into science and math, the knowing doesn't bring in the question of why. I mean, why did it happen? And when I began to get into not just the what and the when. So that's the history that's taught. What happened and when did it happen? But you see, my thinking was narrow, and I didn't get into why did it happen, and why does it keep happening? I mean, why is it happening right now in Greece? I mean, why is that happening in Greece? I mean, it's happened before. So why is it happening in Greece right now? It happened in Venezuela, right? Why did it happen in Venezuela? It's the same thing. And when I put the why into it, and begin to go back through the record again with the why and the wherefore, and not just the what and the when, things fell in place for me. And I have to say this to those scholars out there, which you don't know anything. You think that you do, but you don't know anything. I listen to you. Some of you, I won't call your name on the air because I don't have the permission to do that. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm just telling you generically, and what I'm saying here is that you don't have it, and most of you are nothing but cultists in terms of your standing behind Abraham Lincoln, who was a monster. You will object to that, but you will not prove it wrong. There are 600,000 Americans that died in that war. Blacks, and the blacks, those of you that are saying that the slaves built this country, you have to be out of your mind. Do you understand what happens when war is on the soil of a country? This country was devastated. Wars destroy countries. If the country is involved in a war off of its land space, the country is destroyed by its economy because it has to pay for it. And wars are very expensive. And because it is expensive, what the politicians do in that case there is they put the war on a credit card, because if they put the expense upon the people, they throw them out of power. That's your deficit. They make the next generation pay for it when they have left power. But in terms of the Civil War, anything that the slaves had built, and what had they built at that point, if they're on the plantation, what had they built? But when the war is fought, everything that was built resembled what happened in Haiti when Haiti collapsed. Do you understand what happened in the South? The South was what Vonnet is talking about, the ruins of empire, because war destroys whatever was built. This country is in shambles. And in order to explain that and justify that, you got to make it something about humanity, a higher ideal. And the higher ideal is that Abraham Lincoln wanted these slaves off that plantation, and he emancipated those slaves. Because you got 600,000 Americans who died in that war. And someone has the answer for the death of almost 1 million people. That's a Holocaust. And they had to cover the tracks to justify that. I'm going to give you something to think about here at the end of this program, because I'm going to show you how you can bridge the gaps in this country overnight and speak to power at the same time. But it won't be the things that you're doing down there in South Carolina and what you're talking about doing throughout the nation. All that's going to do, and that's what they want to do, keep us fighting among ourselves on a horizontal plane, which is what Stefan Malinow talked about in terms of keeping persons that are fighting horizontally, because when you're fighting horizontally, you fail to look up. You know what, the ones that are the puppeteers that are orchestrating all of this, the progressives that are orchestrating this, the ones in the background, I can name some of them, but you know some of the names already. The ones that paid, for example, the one that paid $32 million to orchestrate what happened down there in Ferguson. They invested $32 million in Ferguson, Missouri to keep that fuel going. And then the Klan comes in here to make this in terms of that nonsense. And they don't understand that that's the same thing that happened to them in 1866. They don't understand that they desecrated that flag. That flag is not a flag of slavery. when people are fighting in a war, you know who they're fighting for? You know, McInnes, a guy named Incentive, his name, he doesn't call himself McInnes, it's MCINNES, from Canada. He has come into the United States. He lives in the United States now, but he is a late arrival in the U.S. He was born in Canada and grew up in Canada, went to school in Canada. That guy knows more about the war between 1861 and 1865 than they do in the United States. And he was up there. He has a video. I think it's about maybe 5 minutes long, maybe a little bit longer. But it's riveting. 5 reasons why you should not take down the Confederate flag. And one of them was that he was saying they were not out there saying, you know, he has a shooting, pew, pew, pew. I'm going to keep my slaves. My slaves making money for me, pew, pew. It was not that. He said when people out there on the battlefield, you know what they're fighting for? Ask those persons that went over there and ferreted out bin Laden, who they were fighting for. What they were doing over there, when they went over there and that one helicopter went down and they went in that compound and rooted this man out of there. They were fighting for each other. They were trying to bring the guy next to them back. They're not out there talking about some philosophy on the battlefield. These people out there fighting for the guy who's next to them, and he's fighting for the guy next to him. They're fighting for each other. Our warriors, the warriors are out there on the battlefields of this nation, and they are fighting for each other. They leave the other stuff to other people. This is not a slavery flag. This is a battle flag. And these persons know that. It's a battle flag. And now we're going to get to what are they battling over. Well, I just so happened to have the speech, 8 pages. I have every word right here that Abraham Lincoln gave in his inaugural address. And we should therefore see what Mr. Lincoln says about slavery, because that's what you say the war is over. So I'm going to quote the great emancipator. And when I say great emancipator, I say that with all kinds of quotes, because you cannot free slaves that you have no control over and then leave the ones that you do have control over in bondage and call yourself emancipator, because you emancipated nothing. You know, I see that as really equivalent to what Obama was trying to tell Joe the plumber when he was out there debating him. We should have gotten, that should have put antennas up there when he's talking about, I think it's a charitable thing to do. Charitable in taking somebody else's money and you are going to seize it under force and then take it and then you're going to distribute it and call that distribution charity, which didn't come out of your pocket. And freeing the slaves is taking an Emancipation Proclamation and applying it over there. When there were 34 states in the Union, 23 of them that stayed in the Union, and 11 of them came out, and you're going to apply it in the 11 states, and there are 4 slave states that are in the Union that it did not apply to, and you're going to call this emancipation? You got to be kidding me. The other mistake that you make is that you make the mistake in thinking that emancipation of some of the slaves is the same thing as abolishing slavery. If that were the case, you would not have had the 13th Amendment passed in December the 6th, 1865, and Lincoln at this time is dead, and has been dead for 8 months when the 13th Amendment is passed. You can't run that by me when I have the documents and understand the documents I'm reading. So this idea of Lincoln being the great emancipator falls on the face of it. And let me tell you another aspect of that. When those soldiers showed up, and when the slaves were aware that the fight was going on, the other part of it is that those slaves emancipated themselves. Maybe you didn't read the book carefully. But at the beginning of this war, when those soldiers showed up, those blacks went there to those lands. And if this was about slavery, then why did Butler get in trouble, General Butler? Because when they came behind their lines, those in the battlefield, they don't have this ideology. They want to win the war. That's their job. They're soldiers. And they see this is weakening the enemy's forces. If the slaves do escape, then their ability to prosecute this war is reduced by the number of slaves that will vacate the premises, because that work got to be done by somebody else. It takes people off the battlefield. That benefits them. They like that. But Lincoln chastises Butler and chastises some of the others and tell them not to do that. Do not take these slaves as contraband, and let their masters come in and recapture the slaves and carry them back to the plantation. And they did that. That's your history book that you have not read. This is not about slavery. This war is about the same thing that the founders were fighting over. And I was saying, I'm not forgetting where I am. I'm doing a lot of things here. I'm trying to bring a lot of different pieces together here so you can see the whole picture. But I said here that Lumbaugh's father made a mistake. He made some great statements in there. That's the best document I read in terms of the things that the framers went through. It is a brilliant document that he wrote. The mistake in it, though, is that he said that they were fighting because of their objection to taxation without representation. Now, he gets right the part about they wanted to return to the status quo, but he doesn't understand what the status quo was. The status quo was no taxes. And folks, that's why they did not put a direct tax in the Constitution. If they had done that, after this Revolutionary War was over, and those persons are still living at that point, there would have been another Revolutionary War on the soil of America. We don't even recognize how anti-tax this country was up until 1913, but the progressives were still working, and in 1913, they were able to slide in under the premises that the income tax would only be a tax imposed against a certain element of the population. And it didn't have any sizable numbers in it, so we're just going to tax the rich. I've heard that somewhat before recently, have I not? In terms of we want to put these taxes on the rich. Everybody's celebrating, everybody's clapping, but it eventually will hit you. Even if the taxes don't hit you, the implication of the taxes will hit you. A point I was trying to make this morning, people trying to tell me, liberals try to tell me a lot of things. I don't buy any of it. Can you believe somebody would believe that you can put a minimum wage on a business and you set it up as a bureaucrat, but it has no implications for the business? And when I said that a minimum wage bill is an unemployment bill, they can't understand that. Because they think that because you can declare a situation to exist by fiat, and because it's declared by law, that is what will be the outcome of the declaration. That's nonsense. The reason why a person digging a ditch with a shovel and one digging a ditch with a caterpillar, the one that's digging with a caterpillar makes more money, is not because you can declare he'll get that wage, but because the person is more productive. Production is what adds cost to labor. Not some bureaucrat making a law and putting a tax upon business that drives the business to have to do what? Cut the labor force down. And they were acting like you can do that without any consequences. And when I was trying to tell them that 96% of the economists will agree with me on this point, that minimum wage laws are unemployment bills. If you don't think it is, they're going to be making your sandwiches, the kiosks and things like that, they've been making these sandwiches with machines. They're not going to be paying these guys $15 an hour, and a guy comes in and orders a sandwich in 15 minutes, you got 15 minutes of rest and 15 minutes going to the counter and making a sandwich. They can't afford that. And so they're going to have the real minimum wage, and the real minimum wage is zero. Because once you lose your job, guess what your wage is? That's what it is. Zero, and that's the minimum wage for those who lose their jobs. And they're taking vows as if that does not happen. Okay, let me read this to you real quickly. We got to get off the air here. So let me read this to you in terms of Abraham Lincoln's words at his first inaugural address. Fellow citizens of the United States, In compliance with a custom as old as the government itself, I appear before you to address you briefly, and to take in your presence the oath prescribed in order for me to enter on the execution of this office. I do not consider it necessary at present for me to discuss those matters of administration about which there is no special anxiety or excitement. Apprehension seems to exist among the people of the southern states that by the ascension of a Republican administration, their property, meaning the slaves, and their peace and personal security are to be endangered. There has never been any reasonable cause for such apprehension. Indeed, the most ample evidence to the contrary has all the while existed. Listen to this now. All the evidence that is on the record, everything that Lincoln has said, proves the other thing to be true. It is found in nearly all the published speeches of him who now addresses you. I do but quote from one of those speeches when I declare that, quote, I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery That part didn't come out clearly. It's a line there that's not clear. But what he's saying there, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the places where it exists. He says in that part that I do not believe I have the authority to do it in the Constitution, which he didn't, because it's in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 5. You also have it in Article 1, Section 4. And so it is embedded in the Constitution, and he cannot, in fact, change that. He says he doesn't have the authority to do it, and of course he does not. But Lincoln does not care about authority. He had no authority either to suspend habeas corpus, but he did. He had no authority to put Vallandigham in jail, and he did it. He had no authority to put 30,000 people in the North that dissented against this war, and he did it. He had no authority to close down 300 newspapers that disagreed with him on this premise, and he did it. And he had no authority to go to war, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, and he did it. And he's saying here that he does not have any authority to do it. But he also says here, which is really the point, I also have no inclination to do it. So slavery is safe in the Union. Where it is not safe is outside the Union. And that's what happened to them. And now people think that the flag is a slavery flag, when the fact is that slavery would have been protected in the Union, and out of the Union it was unprotected, because that was not why they left. If slavery was the issue, they would stay in the Union where it was protected. They went out for the same reason the framers went out. And that's why they want this flag down. I will make this point real quickly. I've got to get off the air. We can solidify this country, but can't do it the way they're doing it now by taking all these emblems down. I brought a whole 2 pages of things they're talking about doing. I'll tell you how you can do it. Let's understand this war, and let's have every state in the Union put up a Confederate flag in every state in this Union, because the fight today is the same fight that they had. If you deny that, go back and look what the Supreme Court did 2 weeks ago. All that is nothing other than taking liberty away from this country, and the framers stood up against it, and now it's our time. If all the states understand this war, and you unite around that, rather than letting them divide you around it, but you unite around it, that solves the problem, and sends a message to the ruthless dictators and despots in Washington, D.C. Okay, got to get out of here. But that's what I came here to say. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow. And read my article today, because I'll be writing about this when I get back to my office.